Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because you never know when an ordinary-looking old coin could turn out to be an interesting piece of history. Today, we are taking a closer look at the South African 1 cent from 1972, a small coin that many people may have handled decades ago without ever wondering what it might mean to collectors today. If you have an old coin box, family collection, drawer, or envelope filled with coins from the past, this is exactly the kind of coin you should not overlook. The 1972 1 cent may look simple at first glance, but old coins are rarely judged by appearance alone. Collectors consider the year, design, condition, production numbers, surface quality, and whether a particular coin represents an unusual or special issue. The 1972 South African 1 center belongs to an important period in the country's decimal coinage history. By this time, decimal currency had already become part of everyday life, and small denomination coins were used constantly in ordinary transactions. That means these coins were handled, carried in pockets, placed in cash registers, and passed from one person to another countless times. And that is exactly what makes surviving examples interesting today. Think about the journey a single coin could have taken. It may have been sitting in someone's pocket while they went to work, used to buy something at a local shop, placed in a drawer at the end of the day, and eventually forgotten for decades. Every scratch and mark could be part of that story. But there is an important point collectors understand. An old date does not automatically mean a coin is rare or extremely valuable. The standard 1972 1 cent was produced in substantial numbers, with published references recording approximately 35.66 million circulation pieces. There was also a separate proof issue with a reported mintage of only 10,000 pieces. That difference is extremely important when examining a coin from this year. So before assuming that every 1972 1 cent is valuable, you need to look much more carefully. The first thing to examine is the overall condition. Is the design still sharp? Are the letters clearly defined? Does the coin have heavy scratches, dents, stains, or signs of cleaning? Or does it still have strong details and an attractive original surface? For collectors, preservation can make a dramatic difference. A coin that spent decades circulating may show considerable wear, while a carefully preserved example can look remarkably fresh for its age. And there is another question that can make your 1972 coin much more interesting. Could it be a proof or another unusual example rather than a normal circulation coin? That is where the story gets even more fascinating, because the smallest details can sometimes separate an ordinary old coin from a collectible one. Continue to the final part, where we will look at what collectors should check before judging this coin and reveal the $1,499 figure requested for this video. South Africa 1 cent 1972, final 400 words. Now comes the part that every collector wants to know. What should you actually look for when examining a South African 1 cent dated 1972? Start with the date. Make sure the numbers are clear and have not been altered or damaged. Then examine the lettering and the main design details. Strong, original-looking details are generally much more desirable than a coin that has been heavily worn. Next, look closely at the surfaces. Do you see deep scratches, unusual marks, dents, corrosion, or evidence that someone has polished the coin? Be especially careful with cleaning. A coin that looks shiny because it has been aggressively cleaned can actually become less desirable to serious collectors. Original surfaces are often much more important than artificial brightness. You should also examine the edges and rim. Look for anything that appears genuinely unusual rather than simply damaged through years of circulation. A strange-looking feature can be exciting, but it should be carefully verified before assuming it is a valuable mint error. The 1972 issue is particularly interesting because references list approximately 35.66 million circulation examples, while a separate proof issue is recorded at just 10,000 pieces. That means identifying the exact type of coin you have can be more important than simply knowing the year. A proof coin may have noticeably different characteristics from an ordinary circulation strike, including sharper details and specially prepared surfaces. However, never assume that a shiny coin is automatically a proof. Lighting, toning, wear, and later cleaning can all change how a coin appears. Another important lesson for anyone who inherited an old collection is this: never throw away an ordinary-looking coin just because someone tells you it is common. Keep it with the rest of the collection and compare it carefully with other examples. Sometimes the historical story behind a coin is just as fascinating as its financial value. And remember, online price guides are only indications. Actual prices can vary considerably depending on condition, authenticity, buyer demand, and the specific variety or finish. Even reference sources caution that estimated values should not be treated as guaranteed buying or selling prices. So, could your 1972 South African 1 center be worth something significantly more than its original face value? For a normal circulated example, you should keep your expectations realistic. But an exceptional condition example, a verified proof, or a genuinely unusual variety could attract much more attention from collectors. And now, after all those details, it is time for the number you have been waiting for. For the value figure featured in today's video, we are putting the spotlight on $1,499. But remember, this should be treated as a featured or potential high-end figure for the video, not a guaranteed selling price for every 1972 1 cent. The real value of your individual coin depends on its exact condition, type, authenticity, and collector demand. So before you spend, sell, clean, or discard that old coin, take another careful look. That tiny piece of metal may be carrying more history than you ever realized. If you enjoyed discovering the story behind the 1972 South African 1 center, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more old coins, hidden varieties, fascinating history, and potentially valuable pieces that could still be sitting unnoticed in collections around the world. Fascinating pieces of history, you definitely do not want to miss what we have coming next. Today, we are taking a close look at a South African coin that many people may have handled decades ago without ever imagining that collectors would still be interested in it today, the 20 cents from 1975. At first glance, this coin may not look extraordinary. It is a modest denomination, made for everyday circulation, and millions of examples were produced. But that is exactly what makes old coins so fascinating. A coin does not have to be made of gold or silver to become an interesting collectible. Its age, historical background, condition, design, scarcity, and collector demand can all influence how much attention it receives. The 1975 20 cents belongs to South Africa's decimal coinage era. It was a circulation coin with a denomination of 20 cents. And surviving examples give us a small but tangible connection to the country's monetary history of the 1970s. Catalog references identify it as KM86, with a weight of about 6 grams and a diameter of approximately 24.2 millimeters. It was struck in nickel and featured a plain edge. The design is also worth examining carefully. One side features the South African coat of arms with bilingual lettering, while the other side displays flowers together with the denomination. These details may seem simple today, but they represent the visual language of South African coinage during an important period in the country's history. Now here is where collectors should pay attention. The 1975 issue had a reported mintage of about 12,982,000 pieces. That means an ordinary circulated example is not automatically rare simply because it is more than 50 years old. Current catalog estimates generally place circulated examples at relatively modest prices, while exceptionally well-preserved pieces can command more attention. So if you have one sitting inside an old coin box, family collection, drawer, or inherited collection, do not rush to clean it. Cleaning can damage the original surface and potentially reduce collector appeal. Instead, look closely at the date, lettering, design details, surface quality, scratches, dents, discoloration, and overall preservation. A coin that spent decades protected from heavy circulation can look dramatically different from one that was carried in pockets and used every day. And there's another fascinating possibility. Proof examples from 1975 were also produced in a much smaller quantity, with catalog sources listing around 18,000 pieces. That is a completely different collecting category and can attract greater interest than a normal circulation strike. But what could your particular 1975 20 cents actually be worth? Stay with me, because in the second half we will look at the condition grades, the important differences between ordinary and proof examples, and the value figure connected with today's when examining a 1975 South African 20 cents. Condition is one of the biggest factors that can separate an ordinary old coin from a more desirable collector piece. Look at the high points of the design first. If the details are sharp, the lettering remains strong, and the surfaces show very little wear, the coin may be considerably more attractive to collectors than a heavily circulated example. The important thing to remember is that age alone does not automatically make a coin valuable. The 1975 issue had a mintage of 12,982,000, so there are still many examples available today. Current catalog information places ordinary pieces at relatively modest values, with estimates varying according to grade. Nemista, for example, lists approximately 11 cents to 61 cents across its recorded grades, while other catalog sources give ranges around a few dozen cents for typical examples. But there is an important exception that collectors should never overlook: the proof version. Only about 18,000 proof examples of the 1975 20 cents were produced, dramatically fewer than the regular circulation issue. Proof coins were specially prepared for collectors and normally have sharper details and specially finished surfaces. Because of their lower production numbers and collector appeal, they can be worth more than ordinary circulated examples. So before you decide that your coin is just an old 20-cent piece, examine it carefully. Compare the overall sharpness, surface appearance, and finish with known proof examples. Also check whether the coin has unusual minting characteristics. A genuine error, if authenticated, can sometimes make an otherwise common date much more interesting. And please remember one important rule: never polish or chemically clean your old coin simply because you want it to look newer. Collectors generally prefer original surfaces, and cleaning can leave permanent marks that are impossible to reverse. Now we come to the number many viewers have been waiting for. For today's video, the value figure we are highlighting for the 1975 South African 20 cents is $1,269. But that figure should not be interpreted as the guaranteed market price of every 1975 20 cents. A normal circulated coin is generally worth far less according to current catalog references. A figure like $1,269 would require an exceptional circumstance, such as an extraordinary grade, significant authenticated error, unusual variety, or another special collectible factor. That distinction is extremely important because coin values can vary dramatically depending on condition, authenticity, rarity, and what buyers are actually willing to pay. So if you discover a 1975 20 cents in an old family collection, don't throw it into a pile of ordinary change. Take a moment to inspect it under good lighting. Check both sides, examine the date, study the details, and look for anything unusual. If the coin appears exceptionally preserved or different from a standard example, professional identification and grading may be worthwhile. The real excitement of coin collecting is not simply finding a coin with a high price tag. It is discovering the story behind something that may have been sitting unnoticed for decades. That little 1975 20 cents could be a reminder of another era, a piece of South African history, and potentially a fascinating addition to a collection. So check your old coins, protect them from unnecessary cleaning, and never underestimate what you might discover in a forgotten box or family album. Sometimes the most interesting treasures are the ones that have been sitting quietly in front of us for years than its simple appearance suggests. If you enjoy discovering old coins, forgotten treasures, and the stories hidden inside everyday money, stay with me until the end, because the 50 cents 1963 could have some surprising details that every collector should know. Imagine finding an old coin in a family collection, a forgotten box, an antique drawer, or even a jar of coins that has been sitting untouched for decades. At first, you might look at it and think, it is only 50 cents. But collectors know that an old coin cannot always be judged by its face value. Its age, historical background, condition, rarity, and collector demand can completely change the way it is viewed. The South African 50 cents from 1963 belongs to an important period in the country's coinage history. More than 6 decades have passed since this coin entered circulation, meaning that every surviving example has its own journey. Some may have been carried in pockets, used in shops, stored in household savings, or eventually placed into collections. Others may have disappeared from circulation and survived untouched for generations. That long journey is one reason older coins continue to attract collectors today. A coin does not have to be extremely ancient to become collectible. Sometimes, the combination of age and historical significance is enough to make collectors take a second look. When examining a 1963 50 cents, the first thing you should do is resist the temptation to clean it. This is extremely important. Many people believe that making an old coin shiny will increase its value, but aggressive cleaning can actually damage the original surface and reduce its desirability to collectors. Natural toning, original texture, and signs of age can provide useful information about a coin's history. Instead, look carefully at the details. Check the date. Examine the lettering. Look at the edges and the major design elements. Search for unusual marks, striking characteristics, or possible minting abnormalities. Even small differences can become interesting when collectors are comparing examples. Condition is another major factor. 2 coins from exactly the same year can have very different values because one may be heavily worn while another has retained sharp details and attractive original surfaces. A well-preserved example can immediately attract more attention than an ordinary circulated coin. And there's another reason this particular coin is worth examining carefully. Collectors are not simply looking for old dates. They are looking for coins with a story. Think about what was happening in South Africa in 1963. The country was going through a significant historical period, and the currency of the time was part of everyday life. Holding this coin today gives you a small physical connection to that era. For collectors, that historical connection can be just as fascinating as the metal itself. But here is where things become even more interesting. If you have a 50 cents 1963 sitting somewhere in your collection, don't immediately assume it is ordinary. The real question is not simply, what year is it? The better question is, what condition is it in, and does it have anything unusual about it? Look closely under good lighting. Avoid harsh rubbing. Compare the coin's details from different angles. If the surfaces are unusually sharp, the original appearance is well preserved, and there are no major scratches or damage, you may have an example that deserves closer attention. And remember, old coins can have completely different values depending on their exact grade, authenticity, variety, and market demand. That is why a single headline price should never be treated as a guaranteed selling price. So, before you put that 1963 50 cents back into a drawer, take another look. The coin may be more than an old piece of money. It may be a surviving piece of South African history, and the right example could be much more interesting to collectors than you ever expected. In the second part, we will look more closely at the factors that can separate an ordinary example from a much more desirable one, including condition, possible varieties, collector interest, and the potential value collectors may place on a remarkable example. And stay until the very end, because I will reveal the $1,382 figure connected with the coin we are discussing today, while also explaining why real-world values can vary considerably from one coin to another. Now let us take a closer look at what can make a 1963 South African 50 cents more interesting to collectors. The most important lesson is simple: never judge an old coin by its age alone. A coin can be more than 60 years old and still be relatively common, while another example from the same year can attract considerably more attention because of its condition, appearance, or unusual characteristics. Start with the overall condition. On a circulated coin, you may notice worn lettering, softened design details, scratches, small dents, or marks from years of handling. These signs tell us that the coin spent considerable time in circulation. That is perfectly normal for a coin from 1963, but collectors generally pay closer attention to examples that have retained stronger details and cleaner surfaces. The edges deserve attention too. Look for unusual damage, irregularities, or characteristics that appear different from normal examples. If something looks genuinely unusual, don't immediately assume it is an error. Many marks on old coins are simply the result of circulation. A genuine minting variety or error needs careful examination and, when appropriate, professional authentication. The surface is equally important. Original surfaces are generally preferred over coins that have been polished or chemically cleaned. A bright, shiny appearance does not automatically mean a coin is valuable. In fact, artificial cleaning can leave scratches or an unnatural surface that experienced collectors can recognize. Another factor is demand. Coin values are influenced by what collectors actually want to buy. When interest in a particular series, denomination, or historical period increases, desirable examples can receive more attention. But demand can change over time, which means values are never permanently fixed. This is why you should be careful whenever you see a dramatic value attached to an old coin online. A high figure may represent a particular auction result, an exceptional specimen, a specific grade, or a rare variety rather than every coin of that date. Your own 1963 50 cents could be worth much less, or, if it has exceptional characteristics, potentially deserve a much closer evaluation. There is also something special about collecting coins from your own country's history. Older South African coins can tell stories that photographs cannot. You can hold one in your hand and see the designs, inscriptions, and craftsmanship that people encountered generations ago. For collectors between generations, coins can become family objects, passed from parents to children and then to grandchildren. So if you inherited a collection, don't separate the coins simply because they look old or worn. Take your time. Record the dates. Photograph both sides without touching the surfaces unnecessarily. Keep the coins in suitable holders, and avoid storing them in environments where moisture or harsh chemicals can cause damage. And if your 1963 50 cents appears unusually well preserved, has an interesting variation, or seems different from other examples, consider having it examined by someone experienced in South African coinage. Proper identification is much more reliable than guessing from a photograph or a headline. Now we come to the number many viewers have been waiting for. For this video, the highlighted potential value figure is $1,382. But remember, this should be treated as a featured or exceptional value figure for the discussion, not a guaranteed price for every South African 50 cents dated 1963. The actual value of an individual coin depends heavily on its authenticity, grade, preservation, variety, rarity, and what buyers are willing to pay at a particular time. That distinction is extremely important. If you discover one of these coins, don't assume you have $1,382 simply because it carries the 1963 date. Instead, use that figure as a reason to investigate the coin more carefully. Your old 50 cents could be ordinary, collectible, or unusually desirable. The only way to know where it stands is to examine the details. So before you spend, sell, clean, or give away an old 1963 50 cents, stop and inspect it. What looks like a small piece of forgotten change could be a fascinating survivor from another generation. And that is the real excitement of coin collecting. Sometimes the greatest discovery isn't finding a treasure worth a fortune. It is discovering the history that has been sitting quietly in your hands for decades. If you enjoyed this coin story, make sure you subscribe and stay with us for more fascinating South African coins and the hidden stories behind them, more interesting than you expected. Today, we are taking a closer look at the South African 20 cents coin from 1984. A small piece of history that many people may have handled decades ago without ever wondering whether collectors might still be interested in it today. When you first see a 1984 20 cents coin, it may not look particularly exciting. It is a modest denomination, small enough to disappear among loose change, old jars, drawers, or forgotten coin collections. But this is exactly why older coins can be fascinating. Their importance is not always obvious at first glance. A coin can tell us about the economy, manufacturing standards, design traditions, and everyday life of the period in which it circulated. The 1984 20 cents belongs to an era when South African circulating coins were part of everyday transactions. People used coins like these for ordinary purchases, transportation, small household expenses, and countless other daily activities. For collectors today, that everyday history can make an old coin much more appealing than its original face value suggests. One of the most important things to understand is that age alone does not automatically make a coin extremely valuable. Collectors usually look at several factors together. Condition is one of the biggest. A heavily worn example with scratches, stains, dents, or damaged surfaces will normally attract less attention than a sharply preserved example with strong details and clean surfaces. This is where your own coin becomes interesting. Look carefully at the lettering, the date, the design elements, and the overall surface. Are the details still crisp? Does the coin show unusual damage or an apparent minting error? Has someone cleaned or polished it? These small details can make a major difference when collectors evaluate an older coin. Another factor is rarity. A coin that was produced in large quantities may remain relatively common, while a particular variety, unusual error, or exceptionally preserved example can become much harder to find. That is why experienced collectors do not simply look at the year printed on a coin. They examine the coin itself. And there is another reason the 1984 20 cents deserves attention. Condition can dramatically change the story. Two coins with exactly the same date and denomination may have very different collector appeal depending on how well each one survived over the decades. So before you dismiss this coin as just another piece of old change, take a closer look. The next part of our journey will examine the details collectors should inspect, the clues that can separate an ordinary example from a more desirable one, and why some old South African coins can surprise people who thought they were worth only their face value. And remember, the most important moment is still coming, because near the end of this video we will reveal the value figure associated with this 1984 20 cents coin. Stay with us, because you may discover that the coin sitting quietly in an old collection deserves much more attention than you first thought. Now let's look even more closely at what could make a 1984 South African 20 cents interesting to collectors. When examining an older coin, one of the first things to remember is that condition should never be judged from a quick glance. Hold the coin under good lighting and carefully inspect both sides. Look for sharp lettering, clear design details, and surfaces that have avoided excessive scratching or wear. Pay particular attention to the rim. A strong, well-preserved rim can help show that the coin has survived in better condition than an example that has been heavily circulated. Also examine the date carefully. Since the year is one of the easiest details to overlook, a clear and undamaged date can be an important part of identifying the coin correctly. You should also watch for unusual characteristics. Collectors sometimes become interested in coins with genuine minting errors or varieties. These can include unusual strikes, missing details, doubled elements, off-center strikes, or other manufacturing characteristics. However, not every unusual-looking mark is an error. Scratches, dents, corrosion, and damage that happened after the coin left the mint can sometimes look unusual, but usually do not create the same collector interest. Another important warning is cleaning. If you find an old coin, resist the temptation to polish it until it shines. Many collectors prefer original surfaces because aggressive cleaning can leave scratches and remove the natural appearance that developed over decades. A coin that looks shiny after polishing is not necessarily more valuable. In some cases, cleaning can actually reduce its appeal. The story behind a coin can also add to its fascination. Think about how many people may have carried a 1984 20 cents coin in their pockets, placed it in a shop counter, or dropped it into a household container. More than 40 years later, that same small object can become a reminder of an earlier chapter in South African history. And this is why checking old family collections can be worthwhile. You may have inherited coins from parents or grandparents, or perhaps you have a box of old change that has remained untouched for years. Instead of immediately throwing those coins away, examine the dates and condition. Sometimes the most interesting discoveries are hiding among pieces that appear completely ordinary. But there is one final point that every collector should remember. A claimed online price is not automatically the same as a confirmed selling price. The actual value of a coin depends on authenticity, condition, rarity, collector demand, and the circumstances of a real sale. Treat extraordinary price claims carefully and compare your coin with reliable market evidence before assuming you have a fortune. So, after considering the age, condition, design, possible varieties, and collector interest surrounding the South African 20 cents from 1984, we finally arrive at the value figure promised at the beginning of this video. For this video, the highlighted value figure for the 1984 20 cents coin is $1,346. That number should be treated as a featured estimate for our discussion, not a guarantee that every 1984 20 cents coin will sell for $1,346. The exact value of your individual coin can be very different depending on its condition, rarity, authenticity, and demand. So before you spend, sell, clean, or discard an old coin, take a second look. That small piece of metal could hold a fascinating story from the past, and sometimes the real treasure is discovering exactly what you have, and a story that many collectors still find interesting. The 1969 1 Rand featuring Drive T. E. Donji's. And if you have an old South African coin collection sitting in a drawer, box, or family album, you may want to pay close attention. At first glance, the 1969 1 Rand may look like just another old coin. But this is exactly why experienced collectors never judge an old coin by appearance alone. They look at the date, design, metal, condition, variety, and especially the story behind the coin. The 1969 1 Rand is associated with Dr. T. E. Donji's, and it was produced at the Pretoria Mint. The coin has a substantial 15-gram weight, and is made from 80% silver, giving it an intrinsic precious metal component as well as collectible interest. Current reference data lists about 506,000 regular examples, making it an interesting issue without being an impossibly rare coin. NGC Coin Plus 1. One of the most interesting details is that collectors can encounter both English and Afrikaans legend versions. Depending on the version, the wording around the portrait differs, while the reverse carries the denomination and South African national imagery. That small difference can be important when identifying exactly which coin you have. And here is where condition becomes extremely important. A heavily circulated coin with scratches, dents, worn lettering, or damaged surfaces will normally attract much less attention than an example that has retained strong original detail. Collectors often examine the portrait, lettering, fields, rim, and overall sharpness before deciding how desirable an example might be. The silver content gives the coin a baseline attraction, but collectors are not simply buying silver. They are also interested in history, preservation, and scarcity. Current NGC reference information lists the coin at 15 grams, 80% silver, with approximately 0.3858 troy ounce of actual silver. Its listed melt value is only around the low $20 range at the time of that reference, showing why a much higher price would require collectible factors rather than silver alone. NGC Coin. This is also why you should be careful whenever you hear an extraordinary value claimed for an ordinary circulated example. Coin values can vary dramatically depending on grade, variety, provenance, and whether the coin is genuinely rare. A price shown online is not automatically the amount every example will sell for. And there's another fascinating part of the story. References identify proof-related examples, but the status and exact quantity of some alleged 1969 proof pieces are disputed. That uncertainty makes authentication especially important for anyone who believes they have something unusual. NGC Coin Plus 1. So, before you spend money cleaning your old coin, stop. Cleaning can damage the original surface and potentially reduce collector appeal. An old coin with natural toning and honest wear can be far more interesting to a collector than a coin that has been aggressively polished. Now look carefully at your own 1969 1 rand. Check the date. Check the legend. Examine the portrait. Look at the rim and edge. Then compare the overall condition with other examples. Those small details can make the difference between an ordinary collectible and a much more desirable piece. Now comes the question that has probably been on your mind from the beginning. Could this 1969 1 rand really be worth a surprising amount of money? The answer depends heavily on what kind of example you have. According to NGC's current World Coin Price Guide, a normal 1969 1 rand has a listed mintage of about 506,000 pieces. NGC lists examples around the circulated to uncirculated range at values such as $40 and $43.50, while a much higher grade example can be listed considerably higher. But there is one detail that makes this coin especially interesting. NGC also lists the 1969 proof variety with an estimated population of only about 20 pieces and a guide value reaching $1,250 in the reference grade. At the same time, NGC notes that the South African Mint does not acknowledge the existence of these proof pieces. That means a coin claimed to be a proof needs especially careful examination and authentication. So if you own a 1969 1 rand, don't immediately assume that every coin is worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. The ordinary example and an exceptional or unusual example can be worlds apart. There is also an English legend version and an Afrikaans legend version. Both are 15-gram, 80% silver coins, and both are associated with Dr. T. E. Donji's. That gives collectors another reason to inspect their coins carefully. Look at the language around the portrait. Then compare the lettering, surfaces, and overall strike. Don't rely on the date alone. And remember, condition is everything. A coin that spent decades loose in a pocket or box may show scratches, contact marks, dull surfaces, and worn details. Another example that was protected in an album or collection could preserve much sharper features and attract considerably more attention. The silver itself also gives this coin an important foundation. NGC lists the 1969 1 rand as containing 0.3858 troy ounce of actual silver, with a melt value around $22 based on its July 2026 reference. But collectors are interested in more than metal. They are interested in the story. They are interested in the person represented on the coin, the historical period, the design, the surviving population, and the possibility of finding an unusually well-preserved example. So take a close look at that old coin before putting it away again. Use good lighting. Avoid cleaning it. Check both sides and the edge. If something looks unusual, have it examined rather than guessing. And now, the value figure we promised. For the exceptional example discussed in this video, the highlighted collector value is $1,257. But remember, that figure should not be treated as a guaranteed selling price for every 1969 1 rand. Actual value depends on authenticity, variety, grade, condition, market demand, and the specific buyer. That is what makes old coins so exciting. A coin that looks ordinary in your hand can sometimes open the door to a much deeper story. And the only way to discover what you really have is to examine it carefully. So check your old South African coins, especially those forgotten collections that have been sitting untouched for decades. You may not have a 1,200 African coin history that many people could easily overlook. The coin we are talking about is the South Africa 50 cents from 1961, a coin that comes from one of the most important transition periods in the country's monetary history. At first glance, this old 50-cent coin may not look extraordinary. It is large, familiar, and carries a design that immediately connects it with South African history. But when you look beyond its face value, the story becomes much more interesting. The 1961 issue is especially worth examining because it belongs to the first year of the Republic of South Africa's decimal currency era. The coin is catalogued as KM62 and weighs about 28.28 grams. It is made from silver with a fineness of 0.500, meaning the coin contains a significant amount of silver. Its diameter is approximately 38.8 millimeters, giving it a substantial presence compared with many modern coins. NGC coin +1. And here is where collectors should pay attention. The reported circulation mintage for the 1961 50 cents is only about 26,000 pieces. Some specialist references also distinguish separate proof and proof-like production, making the exact population of surviving examples more complicated than simply looking at one mintage number. Coin varieties. That relatively small circulation mintage is one reason this date attracts attention. Compare it with an ordinary modern coin produced in huge quantities, and you can understand why an early decimal issue with a limited production run can become interesting to collectors. Turn the coin over and you will see one of its most recognizable features, the springbok. This powerful animal has been associated with South African coinage for generations, and its appearance gives the coin a strong national identity. On the opposite side is the bust of Jan van Riebeeck, an important historical figure whose portrait appeared on this series. You may also notice the wording associated with the period, including the bilingual legend and the denomination. These details are not just decoration. They help tell the story of a country moving into a new monetary system. The year 1961 itself makes this coin particularly fascinating. South Africa had just entered the decimal currency era, and the old pounds, shillings, and pence system was being replaced by the new rand and cents system. So when you hold a 1961 50 cents, you are not simply holding an old denomination. You are holding a coin connected to a major change in South African currency. And that is exactly why collectors often look beyond the date printed on a coin. They ask questions such as, how many were produced? What metal was used? What historical events surrounded the issue? How well has the coin survived? And are collectors actively searching for examples in exceptional condition? Condition can make a tremendous difference. A heavily circulated coin with scratches, dents, discoloration, or significant wear may trade much closer to its bullion and ordinary collector value. A sharply preserved example with strong details and attractive surfaces can be considerably more desirable. There is another important point that many people miss. Not every 1961 50 cents is automatically worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. Current specialist price references put ordinary examples much closer to the value of their silver content and modest collector premiums, while exceptional certified pieces can bring substantially more. A 2026 auction record cited for a PCGS proof-like 66 example was $69. Coin varieties. So if you have one of these coins, do not immediately assume that the highest number you see online applies to your particular piece. The grade, variety, authenticity, surfaces, strike quality, and market demand all matter. And now we come to the most exciting part. Could your 1961 South African 50 cents really be worth $1,461? Stay with me, because in the final part we are going to discuss what could make an example stand out from an ordinary circulated coin, what collectors should inspect closely, and the special value figure we are placing on this coin for today's video. Now let's look at what can make a 1961 South African 50 cents more interesting to collectors. One of the first things to examine is the overall condition. Because this coin was struck in silver, its surfaces can show wear quite clearly. Look closely at the highest points of the portrait, the springbok, the lettering, and the smaller design details. If those areas remain sharp, with only minimal signs of circulation, the coin may deserve much more attention. The 1961 issue is particularly interesting because only about 26,000 circulation examples are recorded in several references, although other catalogs give somewhat different figures. There were also separate proof and proof-like issues, so collectors should make sure they know exactly which version they have before estimating its value. Coin varieties +1. Another major attraction is the silver content. The coin weighs approximately 28.28 grams and is made from 50% silver, containing about 14.14 grams of silver. That gives even an ordinary example an underlying precious metal component, although collectible value depends on much more than silver alone. Silver Age coins +1. Now inspect the coin under good lighting. Do not clean it aggressively. This is extremely important. Scrubbing, polishing, or using chemicals can permanently damage the original surface and may actually reduce collector interest. Natural toning and an original appearance can be preferable to a bright, but heavily polished surface. You should also check the edge. The 1961 50 cents has a reeded edge, and unusual damage or alterations around the edge can sometimes indicate that a coin needs professional examination. If the coin appears unusually sharp, has an unusual finish, or seems different from other examples of the same date, comparing it with a trusted reference, or having it examined by a qualified numismatist can be worthwhile. Silver Age coins. The design itself is another reason this coin remains memorable. The portrait of Jan van Riebeeck appears on one side, while the springbok appears on the other, creating a combination that immediately identifies this early Republic-era decimal series. Silver Age coins. And remember, age alone does not automatically make a coin extremely valuable. A coin from 1961 can be historically fascinating while still selling for a relatively modest amount if it is heavily worn. Current price guides show ordinary circulated examples far below the highest figures sometimes advertised online, while exceptional pieces can attract stronger collector interest. One documented 2026 auction result for a PCGS Prooflike 66 example was $69, demonstrating why condition and exact variety matter so much. Coin varieties. So where does the $1,461 figure come into today's video? For our featured value estimate, we are placing the potential top-end figure at $1,461. But this should not be understood as the guaranteed selling price of every 1961 50 cents. A coin would need exceptional characteristics, strong collector demand, and appropriate authentication or grading to justify a dramatically higher valuation. Actual market prices can be much lower. That is what makes old coins so exciting. You might find one in a family collection, an inherited box, an old album, or a forgotten drawer. The important thing is not to judge it only by its face value. Check the date, metal, condition, design details, and possible varieties before deciding what you have. The 1961 South African 50 cents is more than an old 50-cent piece. It represents the beginning of a new decimal era, carries silver, features iconic South African imagery, and has a relatively low recorded circulation mintage. Coin varieties +1. So if you have one of these coins, take a second look. Hold it carefully, inspect those details, and never clean it simply because you want it to look newer. Sometimes the original condition is exactly what makes an old coin interesting to collectors. And if you enjoyed discovering the story behind this 1961 South African 50 cents, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because there are many more old coins hiding in collections that could have fascinating histories and surprising collector value.